Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today's video I'm going to be going over the installation of the Dissident Arms modified ALG Galil trigger, specifically for the 556 Rock and Lock version. Now a few years ago, very early in my channel, I went over the installation of the same Dissident Arms ALG trigger in my Gen 2 Ace. Now with that video, since I was so early in my YouTube channel, I was limited to making 15-minute segments at a time. So there was like 6 or 7 parts out there. This time around, and also learning some lessons over the years of what I can go ahead and cut out. This one should be a lot more straightforward. I'll cut out any of the tedious scenes or any of that stuff for me struggling with getting screws in or pins or whatever it may possibly be. Plus, I've already done this before. This is a Gen 1, so there's going to be a little bit of difference in this. Specifically, Dissident Arm says with Gen 1s, you need to remove the hammer over travel stop, I believe what it's called. Not exactly sure what that is. I did compare, took the top cover off, both the Gen 1 here and along with my Gen 2, and tried to look. I didn't see any differences. I did have one of my viewers tell me on my original video or commented that, yes, with the Gen 1, you have to remove hammer travel overstop. He tried to describe to me what it was. I'm really more of a visual person. He said it will be obvious. So once you get to it, you'll see what you have to go ahead and trim off. So we'll get to that when we get to it. As I move through the installation of this, you're going to see I'm going to take the K&S plastic delete kit off. I just did a video of doing the removal of the OEM plastic and installing this kit. If you have any interest in seeing that whatsoever, I'll include a link down below for that. In that video, I also included tips of how to improve the feel of the safety lever, which in my case, it was making it a little bit easier. I think that they're all very stiff coming from the factory. So if you have interest in knowing of how you can lighten that up or even make it stiffer if you want, go check out that video again. I'll put a link down below. I'm going to go ahead and include some of the footage from my plastic delete kit install, because I kind of showed you some of the tricks of removing the top cover and getting it back on. So for anybody who doesn't know anything about this one, I'll go ahead and put that in there. If it's a bit redundant, I'll go ahead and put time markers in there and let you know where you can get straight to just get into the trigger part of it. Or if you hear me talking anything that sounds a little bit out of sync with the video, it's because I was shooting for a different video. So first off, with the top cover. So, IWI makes these top covers very, very stiff for the whole purposes of ensuring that the optic rail on the top cover maintains 0 when you put it on. So you got a dovetail up front. You have a very tight cover fit on the back. It looks like standard AK-47 where you just go ahead and push this in and pop off the top cover. And where people, I think, run into a little bit of trouble is they try fighting the release and trying to wiggle off the top cover. So really what you need to do is get something like a flathead screwdriver here, push it in and down like so. Then you don't have to fight that. You've cleared it. You got room for the top cover to go ahead and break free. And then once you do, just grab it and wiggle it from side to side, and it pops off just like so. Now, going back into the reinstallation, all you got to do is make sure that the front there picks up the dovetail in the front of the gas tube. Once you get that into place, lined up evenly on the sides, you don't have too much hanging off one side and too much hanging off the other. Get it lined up, dovetails in there, and give it the old karate chop. So you'll notice that I went ahead and left the guide rod recessed down below. The way that I push it in when I remove the top cover. If you were breaking down the gun and putting it back together, you want to do the same thing. So once you do that little karate chop, it gets it down at the position of where you need it to be. And then all you have to simply do, charge the handle, and it'll pop into place. So now that we've got the gun broken down to the point where you've got the grip removed, or at least the grip screw if you don't have a plastic delete kit on your gun. You would still have the plastic. It would be held on with the screw here, but the rear nut here would be removed. So assuming you get it down to this point here, I do want to mention that this ALG trigger that I got, it does retain the last round bolt hold open. It's one of those features that I really, really like about the Galil Ace, especially with me being a lefty. So when you go to take out the last round bolt hole open, you don't need to remove, or I'm sorry, when you go to remove the trigger and swap this out with an ALG, you do not have to remove the last round bolt hold open. But there is linkage down in here that is tied into the hammer, tied into the trigger, that you are going to want to make sure that you use some type of slave pin before you remove the trigger, because you do not want this linkage right here that is picking up your trigger pin. You do not want that to fall out. Then it can make it a little bit more complicated. It's not a huge deal. Just be aware of that as you start breaking down the trigger and pulling the components out. All right, so first things first, you want to go ahead and remove the Galil's equivalent of the shepherd's hook. If you look down in here, again, trying to get it to focus. It is not these legs here. That has to do with your dust cover. It is down in under here. You're going to see a long brassy colored leg that goes underneath of the trigger pin and then loops around the hammer pin. So you can kind of see the eyelet right, I'm bumping the camera, right forward of my finger. That is the eyelet that you want to grab. I typically use this little hook scribe here. I'll go in. I'm going to lift it. You hook that and pull it up and out. You can see, once I get the hammer pin and the trigger pin out, I'll show you the correlation between that. Here's the hammer pin. Go ahead and pull out your hammer. Notice the orientation of the spring. So a little bit different from a standard AK. As the hammer goes forward, you have these legs here. Typically, you'd have longer legs up right around, down and in. Loop around the trigger back here. Not so on the Galil. Push that out of the way. All right, so I want to talk about some of the differences between the OEM hammer and then the ALG and the Dissident Arms modified one. So obviously you can see the marks here were Dissident. They do some profiling here. They do some machining here. They remove some material around here. You know, one of my viewers also commented that when they took theirs apart, there was a little washer that came out with it, and they wanted to know if I had seen anything like that. Now, as I pulled the hammer pin out, this fell out of the receiver, and I was trying to figure out exactly where it came from. I know it didn't come from this side on the left hand of the receiver, so I assume it was on the pin inside of the receiver, and for whatever reason that I'm not sure, it acts like a little spacer that goes on the outside of here. Now, looking at this, you know, I measure the Dissident Arms profile here. I'm getting 10655. And when I measure the OEM, it's only getting 0.966. But if I were to take this little washer, spacer, stick it on there, I'm getting 165. So for whatever reason that IWI has this in here in the Gen 1, because this definitely was not in the Gen 2, looks like I am not going to need that with the ALG because the span is already set, or it's made up for that. So kind of interesting. Don't know exactly what that is. Just kind of wanted to point that out. So I went ahead and dry ran the ALG hammer. You got the OEM trigger that's still in there, but I want to just check that span, and it does definitely seem that, you know, this extra little piece that came out, for whatever reason, it's a spacer or bushing they have in that you're going to have to use with the OEM trigger. You do not need to use it when you install the ALG trigger. Right, so when you go to remove your trigger pin, if you use a punch for like a slave, this is where I was mentioning earlier in the video that you want to make sure this is the linkage for your last round bolt hold open. And you can see my pin protruding through there. If I can get it to focus. If you can keep that all together, it makes the installation a little bit easier, though not impossible if it all falls apart on you. So just kind of keep that in mind. Use that as a slave. All right, so with all ALG triggers, you have a little boss back here, and in that boss, you need to install one of these roll pins. They give you two of them just in case you mess them up. But what this roll pin does and why they have that is that's what's going to engage your safety here. Due to varying tolerances and stack ups and whatnot, this is how ALG designed it. You're going to knock the roll pin in, and I'll show you post installation. And it's most cases, especially with my Galil, at least with my second gen, and I just did a dry run and stuck it in there. You're going to have to trim this roll pin back quite a bit. So let me go ahead and get that installed, and I'll come back. All right, so here's that coil pin after you've got it installed. You definitely want to make sure that you get it hammered down all the way. So as the hammer lays in the bottom of the gun and the safety engages it, is you sweep the safety. This notch is going to engage with this. Now, you need to slowly but surely file this down so that you get just enough clearance. And I want to say the ALG says 0.010. No more clearance than that to make sure that you positively cannot accidentally click this into fire position or get the trigger to pull while it's in the safe position. Let me say that. So in my first experience with this, it really kicked my butt. And I made a huge mistake of thinking I had to put everything back together to hold it in the right geometry. You do not. All you need to do is put your trigger in, put the trigger pin in, put your safety in, make sure that it picks up the notch on the other end, and that was enough. All you got to do to make sure that you can check the positive engagement. Take it little by little. And I did mention the ALG gives you two of these roll pins, but I mean, you got to hammer these things in here. They do have a hole to knock it out. I've never had to do that. I don't think I would want to, so you just do it little by little. You know, whether you have a Dremel, in my case, I've got a portable belt sander, a handheld belt sander. Just take it outside. I remove a little bit of material by a little bit of material and get that to engage. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to come back and show you the positive engagement. Before I go ahead and remove material, I do want to show you, it's going to be hard to see if I can get the camera to focus. Get the right angle here. If you flick down in there, you can see the safety hitting that coil pin. That's what we need to shave enough down so that the safety can sweep down into the position that it's supposed to. All right, so I actually got lucky first time around. Was able to get this to get just enough clearance. You can see it right there. If I can get the camera from not shaking. Just enough clearance where I have the safety on. I try to pull the trigger, and there's there's almost no movement. So the contact point right next to the screwdriver. You got the nub on the safety, and you want it to be able to just barely engage that. So again, when it's in the safe position, you cannot possibly release the hammer. So before I get putting this back together permanently, something I'm going to do on this reprofiled and trimmed down hammer from Dissident Arms is the bare metal. I'm going to go ahead and touch it up with some of this Formula 4440 Instant Gun Blue just to keep corrosion at bay. All right, so we're back. Touched up any of the bare metal with a little bit of cold blue. Kind of see the excess on my fingers here. Go ahead and put a light coat of oil on this and then start putting everything back. All right, something I wanted to note that I missed on the disconnector. There's a little bit right here that's trimmed off as well. So you're going to go ahead and hit that with a little bit of cold blue before. All right, something else that I want to point out here is that you're going to see that when you remove your factory trigger and the disconnector, along with that pin, you're going to see this little spring that sits like this. That is the hammer return spring. So now that I have all of the bare metal areas touched up, I'm going to go ahead and be ready for disassembly, or reassembly, excuse me. Still have the trigger sitting in here loosely after doing the fit check with trimming the coil pin. So I'm going to go ahead and push that back out using my roll pin punch to act as a slave to capture the linkage. Make sure for the bolt last round bolt hold open, make sure that that doesn't go anywhere. So when you go to put this back together, using the punch as a slave, like I mentioned, just back it out enough to go ahead and capture the spring. Now you are going to be fighting a little bit of spring tension, so it might be easier for you to retract the punch or slave pin, whatever you're using, into the trigger so it's not sticking out past it. You can see we got it in there. We have that short little leg that is wrapped around the back of the trigger there. I'm going to go ahead and start installing the pin. Get it in just far enough where you have enough room to get the disconnector in place. So the disconnector, along with the spring's going to want to sit down into that little pocket right there. And since you have to sit it in there upside down, as one of my viewers pointed out to me, just take a little bit of dab of grease, stick it in there. It's kind of where having another hand would be somewhat helpful. Stick it into the pocket so that when you go to lower the disconnector in place, you don't have to wrestle with the spring popping out on you. So you see there is a little round circle down there. That is a pocket that picks up the disconnector spring. So you want to make sure that that's sitting down in there. And once you have that in place, you can start pushing your pin. You are going to have to apply some downward pressure to get everything to line up exactly the way that it needs to. And there we go. Everything's lined up. Pin going from left to right. Pin going through receiver, going through the trigger return spring, going through the disconnector, the other side of the trigger, and then through the linkage for the last round bolt hold open. All right, so when going to reinstall the hammer into the receiver, as you see, you want the leg with the angle kicked out of the receiver to the right-hand side and the straight leg on the left-hand side. When you reinsert, you want to reinsert that little crooked leg first, because you want to make sure that that leg goes underneath all of this linkage and the spring for the last round bolt hold open. All right, so there we go. Got the trigger pin in, got the hammer pin in. All right, everything is moving the way it should. Looks like we got all the clearance we need. All right, and the last step is to reinstall the Galil equivalent of the shepherd hook, which it goes underneath the leg or underneath the pin of your trigger pin, which you do want to make sure that the leg for your hammer is out of the way. Kind of loop that down and under. All right, so after you have the shepherd's hook in, did a basic function check. Everything looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and lube up the appropriate points and get it pieced back together so we can do an all-up function check. All right, so got everything buttoned up, put back together. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, that in my Gen 2 Galil Ace 556, I've got the AKT-UL. And as you see here, I do have the UL in this gun here. Kind of compare them side by side. So as far as pull weight goes, it varies between 3 and 3 1/4, so very, very light trigger. With the UL on this gun here, the break is almost instantaneous. With AK triggers, there's always a little bit of a roll to it, but there's not much, and then it just breaks. Whereas when looking at the AKT-UL, there's a little bit more roll to it before it breaks. But pull weight is about the same. It's pretty interesting is that the reset actually feels better on the AKT-UL than it does on the UL. There's less travel to reset the trigger with the EL than there is on the UL. Now, very, very minuscule. Not much to talk about, but that's kind of crazy to me. So less creep to take out of this, even though they're both single stage triggers. Less travel on the EL to break the trigger. UL is almost instantaneous, but the reset on the EL is shorter and faster than it is on the UL. So kind of cool. Time will tell when I go out there and finally hit the range with the ALG trigger. Always say it. They're always an upgrade when it comes to an AK. Even in my Gen 2, I will say that the Gen 1 trigger, if I didn't state already at the beginning of the video, is absolutely horrible, at least compared to the Gen 2. It's like a 6.5 pound pole. It's very stiff. It's long. The Gen 2, I remember when I put the AKT-UL in it, it wasn't really a huge difference, but it was still an improvement. So I was happy with it. Definitely, if you have one of these rock and locks or the Gen 1s, the ALG trigger update or upgrade is definitely worth the money. But overall, with the trigger install and the points that I brought out, hopefully it helps some of you guys out there who are either struggling with getting a trigger installed or a little bit hesitant to it. There's really not much to it whatsoever. Hopefully help some of you guys and gals out. If you like the content, please hit the like, subscribe button, share the video as much as you want. Definitely helps the channel out in the algorithm with YouTube. So thank you very much, and we will see you in the next one.